Welcome to the CIDCI Online Salon Series. I'm Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the CIDCI Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you here today. The Center for Innovation in the Design and Construction Industry is a not-for-profit organization that relies on your financial support to provide these programs. Thank you to all of our sponsors who make all of this possible. Today is Earth Day, an annual event to demonstrate support for environmental protection. The idea of such an event was originally proposed at a UNESCO conference right here in San Francisco in 1969. As with all good ideas, this one was adapted to become a nationwide environmental teach-in on April 22nd, 1970. More than 20 million people poured out onto the streets, and the first Earth Day remains the largest single-day protest in human history. Earth Day continues to be a time for all of us to reflect on the impact of our personal environmental footprint, as well as the decisions we all make in our workplace. We encourage you to get out and enjoy this spring day, and whether the sun is shining or the snow is falling, enjoy it. Okay, here's a bit of information about how today's session will work. We're recording this presentation and we'll place it on the CIDCI website and YouTube as soon as possible. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat box. Today's session will run for 60 minutes. Today, we're going to be discussing implementing technology in industrialized construction. We are joined by Richard Harpham, the CRO at Slate Technologies. He has had a rich career, including leading global marketing for Autodesk's architectural engineering and construction software. Richard was also an early member of a startup, Revit Technologies, and was instrumental in bringing the building information modeling concept, BIM, to market. More recently, Richard was the VP of software products at Katerra, which was closely watched by the design and construction industry with its plan to bring the electronic industry's end-to-end manufacturing process to the construction business. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Maggie. Thanks very much for the introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk today, and I hope we can have some good questions and have a good conversation. All right, so as Maggie and the team were asking me, were we discussing what we could talk about today, I wanted to make sure that I had the chance to share some of the experiences I've had, but maybe try to put it in the context of, how technology has been an enabler, and also what I've learned about how implementing technology in businesses has been both rewarding, a challenge, frustrating. And obviously there's lots of stories people would love to hear from maybe my experiences in Revit and Autodesk, and of course, more recently with Katerra. I'm not going to get into deep specifics for obvious reasons, certainly not talking about any personalities and people who are involved in any of these businesses. But if you have any questions, make sure they go into the chat, and I'll be as careful as I possibly can with my answers and make sure I can impart as much wisdom that I've learned from it as possible. So let's look at some of the lessons I've learned. I guess another way of thinking about this presentation was, okay, maybe it's just things I've tried to do in my career that haven't worked out so well. Was it somebody else's fault? Was it my fault? Was it technology's fault? And actually, was there anything that's actually happened that's even worth talking about? And as I was putting together this presentation, it was quite enlightening, actually. It was really good fun to kind of dig back and look at maybe some of the things that I learned when I really first started my career, and to see how much has changed, and actually in some ways how much hasn't changed, which really sets up the first slide here. I started life as an architect. I came out of architectural school straight into a local authority architecture office in London. And that's where I first encountered this new thing called a CAD machine. I think I got asked to figure out how it worked because I was probably the cheapest guy in the office. It actually was a very early version of AutoCAD. And we had a very, very slow computer, and it was in the corner of the print room because there was no real desk space for it. It was purchased by the local authority, through the government, and it was just this. We've got to figure out what this thing is and how can we use it. With that knowledge, I found myself very quickly moving into a career as a CAD specialist. I became CAD manager at a company called Bovis, which was part of P&O. And that's where things really started to get interesting. And I'll come on to that next. And then it led to me building my own business. That led to me getting recruited by a very small firm called Revit Technologies. I think I was employee number 22. Where I learned a ton of stuff about taking technology to market. That obviously evolved into me joining Autodesk, and I stepped through a number of roles there, culminating in running AutoCAD business, marketing business globally, and the same for the AEC. And then the success there let me work in a number of different startups, a number of different industries, medical devices, language and translation, to name but a few, before I was plucked back into the world of construction by a guy called Michael Marks, who's become a very good friend and mentor for me since. And that's where I learned a ton about what has and hasn't changed across building production. And then with the end of Katerra, I'm now working in a company called Slate Technologies, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So that's number one. Okay, being first to know is usually good. So yeah, I found myself with this system called Acropolis, which was made by BDP Architects. That's when architectural firms first started to create software, and they actually built that software in 1983. They launched it, and they used it for 10 or 12 years before switching to Bentley solutions. It's fun to think those green screens with 32 megabytes of RAM. Wow, that was fantastic. I think the screen refresh or redraw every time you change view took about 30 to 40 seconds. But we managed to do some really interesting work, and I actually dug out some of my old drawings. And it's just like shows you how much has and hasn't changed. We're still creating drawings today. We were able to do some pretty sophisticated things even all that time ago. I deliberately covered up the date there, but I will show you. You can probably read the date. This is when we were actually working in 3D, creating drawings from 3D models. So a lot's changed, a lot hasn't changed in terms of the productivity. Being first to know, getting actually that experience, if there's anyone here starting their career, really looking at where technology is going and how you can embrace it and find ways of learning more about it than anybody else. For me, that was really a strong foundation for me in my career. It led to me, as I said, starting my own business. I think it was that golden age for people where you only had to know a little bit about technology to be an expert. So I'll humbly say I knew a little bit about the web. This new thing called Y2K, and then eventually on from that, it led to me joining Revit. The World Wide Web and Y2K were really interesting experiences for me because there was so much anxiety around should I, could I, how can I be involved with the World Wide Web from firms of every size. I was actually doing a lecture series traveling around the United Kingdom, working for the Chamber of Commerce, helping businesses understand what the World Wide Web was all about, trying to preach on how important it was going to be to them. It was really interesting to look back and seeing the mixed reactions we had back then. I think a lot of people thought could it be a fad? It might not be something that would persevere. The Y2K thing, I think those of you who remember being involved in this is where all the computers, as the clock struck, as the clock moved over to the year 2000, because of the way computers have been designed for basically their CPU clocks to run out in 1999. Everyone was expecting machines just to shut down, planes to fall from the sky. Obviously, that never happened. But what I did learn a lot about was how anxious people would become when you put a very compelling date in front of them, a very compelling event. It led to lavish spending. These stickers were real. They were on machines. They were on kettles. They were on toasters, microwaves. There was a huge amount of money, I guess you could say, wasted on helping people get ready for this dramatic event, which never happened. moving into Revit, that anxiety was something we used to use a lot, and it let us create marketing campaigns that really kind of pushed people towards, if they weren't getting on board, if they weren't getting into new technology, if they weren't going through a transformation, then somehow something bad was going to happen to them in their business. I was able to dig up the old Revit launch video, and I'm going to play it in a moment. You can see how we used our marketing. It was kind of fun to look back. We had for us, I was an application engineer, a technical engineer, trying to demonstrate how the software worked. And this is where I first heard this phrase: "You can't 90% land a jumbo jet." We had a piece of software that really didn't function very well. We were using a lot of hype. We were what used to be called a pump and dump strategy in startups, really putting as much anxiety into the market, kicking as much sand into the face of the competitors, people like Autodesk and Nemetschek and Bentley, as we possibly could, and using everything we could to try and persuade people that this was the way to go, even though you could never really complete a drawing, hence the phrase at the top. But here's the video just for people's fun. Well, there you go. You love that phrase in the middle, "Look behind you." It's very clear what we were trying to achieve there, and who we were targeting it at. The interesting thing about the whole Revit journey was how much passion it created in people, how much anxiety it created in architects and engineers, and yet how it really was quite a difficult solution to implement. And some might argue that it's still quite a challenge to implement any kind of system using what has now become known as BIM. I was very fortunate, I guess, looking back, to be part of a team that was putting together this concept and ways of communicating these ideas around something called building information modeling. The phrase was created in a conference room in New Hampshire, in Manchester, New Hampshire. Many different ideas were put up on a whiteboard about what phrase would work best. There was an existing term called single building model that was in the market at the time, in the early 2000s. That phrase was very much associated with products like Graphisoft. It was a very well-known, well-used phrase for the early 3D modeling solutions for architects in Europe. And Autodesk really wanted to create something that they could be associated with, that was new and fresh and would differentiate Revit from what else was in the Autodesk stable of products. It became a mission that a team worked on for 2 to 3 years. A good colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, Phil Bernstein, was a spokesperson for the company. We would go out and do roadshows and try and get architects to stand up and talk about where the future was going. And we really struggled to get any kind of traction right up until the point where a guy who became a good friend of mine called Jim Van der Zaan at SOM showed that they were using it to do some design work on the Freedom Tower. And the big criticism of Revit at the time was it was only good for small buildings. And suddenly, after one presentation in New York in 2005, Revit became the solution that was known for big buildings. A little bit of inside story that's kind of fun. A fun fact is the Freedom Tower was actually designed in Graphisoft. The only part of the Freedom Tower that was designed in Revit was actually the basement of the building. Everything that's going on below that view you have on the right-hand side. So even though the beautiful parts of the building, if you think the building has beauty, was actually done in another system, that the association between Revit and Freedom Tower became a movement that suddenly overnight, nearly every architectural firm of merit had to have a building information modeling strategy. And it's fun to see now how that's developed into people actually have degrees in BIM. It's very interesting to look at, obviously, as being someone who was there right at the start. Working with Revit obviously had taken me into Autodesk. After getting the building information modeling kind of terms and Revit building success in the US and global markets, I was asked to look after the AutoCAD business, where I learned a lot about packaging. And I like to think about packaging as something that can apply to almost anything you're doing in business. It's the way that you actually package up your challenges are and how that you're going to communicate in a way that will achieve a set of goals. Really needs a lot of thought, and a lot of people are very familiar with the way Autodesk sell now through their subscriptions and through their suites of products that they created. As it happens, but back in early 2000s, we used to use something called Net Promoter Score a lot to figure out how successful we were being in the market. With AutoCAD, what we found is that most of the customers were actually pretty loyal to the AutoCAD brand. Some felt a little trapped because it was pretty hard to get off the AutoCAD kind of horse. There was some, if not a monopoly, certainly a lot of pressure to be on AutoCAD if you're going to create drawings, even from the point of view of recruitment. So you had this very strong group of people. Obviously, when Autodesk bought Revit, the idea was to move as many AutoCAD users to this new 3D way of working as possible. The first thing we found, though, is that immediately pushed people to the left-hand side of this quadrant. These quadrants. The moment you actually took them away from being truly loyal and using AutoCAD to do all their work, it put them into the accessible bucket. Now they were considering all the other products that were available in the market, ArchiCAD, Bentley, Nemetschek, and trying to figure out, whether was it Revit or was it these other products that would help them be successful. And I was putting a lot of our business into high risk. So if people want to know why we actually came up with this idea of the suites and the collections, a lot of it was to do with trying to make sure that we captured as much of our loyal customer base and secured it by putting these products together in such a way that, both from the price point and from the defending against competition point of view, is that we could maintain the business. Yes, it did lead to more customers probably feeling a little bit more trapped, and the dynamics of that were risky. But ultimately, it became a very successful way of looking at how to package products into the market. So I hope that helps people maybe understand a little bit about what happened during that period and why some of those decisions were made. I guess as I left Autodesk, I really started to look a lot more about, and I'd learned a lot about taking products to market during my time there in lots of different ways, whether it was direct SaaS, software as a service, or whether it was a perpetual license or subscription licenses, moving into then other industries, started to look at really the dynamics of how you build a company with new technology and how you might introduce that into the market. I love this diagram. It is by a gentleman called Dunnington Kruger, and I love this on the left-hand side. When you start something, you go with such high confidence. You have such huge expectations, and what tends to happen at some point, you get into this situation where maybe you didn't get as much traction as you hoped. I mean, there's figures thrown around like, maybe 4 or 5% of all technology companies are successful, and it's easy to forget that not everyone becomes a Facebook. I also like this way of looking at that peak of inflated expectations. Some people call it the peak of Mount Stupid, where you really aren't really thinking about what will make you successful. There is a book called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore, and this diagram is often used to explain how technology is taken into the market. As anyone who's watching this today, you might want to think about where you would sit on this graph, if you like. Are you an innovator? Are you a visionary? Are you a pragmatist? You're a conservative. And when you look at your own buying behavior and the way that you buy technology, and then looking at how a technology company is trying to bring technology into the market and the challenges it has, this diagram becomes very interesting. The chasm is where most companies fail. That's basically the assertion that Geoffrey Moore had, which is that you may find a lot of enthusiasts who will try everything. You may find a lot of visionaries who are ready to implement and take risks and take technology into their business. But there is a big gap between the visionaries and the pragmatists. The pragmatists need to see the visionaries be successful before they'll adopt the technology. And this is ultimately why you wonder why startups raise money in the way that they do, and how the traction of a startup you can see it in the growth curves, if you like, and sometimes that can take a long time to get from visionary to pragmatist, as sleepers, if you like. That chasm can be very, very long. And I guess from my personal experience is like I got involved in a lot of companies that were probably moving from innovator to visionary in 5 or 6 years after I left Autodesk before I joined Katerra. Ultimately, the chasm, thinking about how you cross that chasm, is one of the most critical ways that you have to plan your business. And most companies tend to try and do too much at the visionary stage, which really inhibits their ability to get into those pragmatists, which is a good setup, really, because I'll kind of move over to what happened next for me was I joined Katerra. Very interesting experience. I guess that Maggie and the team were asking me, well, why did you join Katerra? What was attractive about joining it? It was just a huge box of toys and potential and vision. One of the things I found was trying to build technology companies was that almost the first thing you had to do is to find those visionaries. Going back to that diagram, find those visionaries who would implement your technology in a real world environment, which would help you get over the chasm into the pragmatists. Joining Katerra, we had everything in one company. We had architects, we had engineers, we had the factories, we had the construction companies. And so we had a full turnkey end-to-end, kind of landscape of opportunity to think about technology without boundaries. So when we had an idea, if you like, or we wanted to build software or create workflows that would improve the way that you could execute building production, we didn't have to go out really and get anything more than, I would say, internal buy-in. And so it was a very attractive area to work as a technologist. Yes, that mission, transform the building industry by embracing a fully integrated model. You can read it. Every aspect of building design, material supply, and construction. So very daunting, very, very, very daunting, and very, very aspirational mission. we kind of had this thing, which is like, if you're in doubt, you just try and find more ways of solving the problem. We weren't bounded, if you like, in the way that we were allowed to think about the business. If we couldn't find what we were looking for, we were encouraged to figure out how to make it, build it, develop it, whether it be in materials, whether it's in robotic manufacturing, whether it was just breaking down the way we work, or finding a building technology. There were challenges we set ourselves internally that I would say were extremely rewarding. There was one particular mission we set ourselves was we ended up calling it K90, which was effectively to build to finish the complete construction of a building in 90 days. That doesn't sound maybe that interesting, except that until you realize that typically that building would have normally have taken anywhere between 10 to 18 months. And we actually managed to complete the project in 86 days, which was, I think it was a 21 unit residential building. And through giving ourselves constantly those types of challenges and setting ourselves these like internal competitions, if you like, to beat, we were able to make some really interesting discoveries on the things that will make a difference. It really led us to think about going beyond just thinking about what's happening on the building site and what's happening in the factory, to thinking about everything as being almost like a factory floor. One of the examples I've always loved is it's not even about whether you can make things efficiently in a factory or whether you can install them efficiently on the site. It's actually how you get them from the factory to the site, how you load the lorry. There was a great example given to me around golf carts. So a lot of people wouldn't realize that a golf cart windscreen, which is those plastic windscreens if ever you play golf, has to have a wind loading resistance of over 70 miles an hour. Now, there's not a lot of 70-mile-an-hour golf carts going around golf courses, but the simple reason is that when they're in the truck traveling at 70 miles an hour, you don't want the windscreens to be destroyed. So it's thinking beyond, the use sometimes of the artifact, the item that you're creating, and thinking about how do you actually then build it, engineer it in such a way that it could be much more efficient in the whole process of getting it from A to B through installation on site. So that leads me to, I guess, talk about what a lot of people would want to know. It's one of my favorite phrases, and another way you may have heard us expressed is this idea of fail fast forward. This is another view of that previous diagram we saw. It's created by Gartner, and I'm just going to use this just to talk a little bit about what happened during the last year I was at Katerra, and some of the challenges you can have in building a company that's going through hyper growth. As you go through that curve and you go through the challenges, there are things on here that you can see on the diagram that you may have recognized from the commentary that surrounded a company, like WeWork or Katerra or any other company that's really trying to push the boundaries. Whether it's negative press, there might be some supplier consolidation. Obviously, failures are going to happen, and the failures are really where you find the opportunities to be more successful. You're feeding, if you like, a machine that consumes money at an extremely high rate, and you're trying to make sure that the money is spent in the most efficient way as you drive towards the point of profitability. As you get towards that point of profitability, as you come out of this trough, is where you really start to see the second generation of products and services start to take shape, and you start to see those successes. We were actually finding some incredible improvements in the way that we could execute construction. I think a lot of that is now moving into other companies. We're seeing obviously a lot more modular based approach and panel based approach in modular buildings. I think you need to see companies like Katerra, like WeWork, like others, push the boundaries and find these learnings, like from the Manure, if you like, that you can really find fresh ways and different ways of working. A question I often get is like, how impactful was COVID to what was going on? I use this diagram just to explain for people who are thinking about their business and how they're going to plan their, if you like, navigate their way through these curves that I've shared. Is I have found that even though I started within an arts-based career, I have become a complete student of finance. I actually love living in the numbers now. Having been a CEO, having run large budgets, 50 million plus in marketing, really understanding your numbers and making sure that you understand how headwinds can affect them is crucial to your success. When something like COVID happens, even though the green line is the preferred cash flow line, where as you get into the pragmatist, it's where you stop taking funding, you start becoming profitable, and you start building that business and start to get dramatically more successful. A headwind can push that curve just a little bit too much to the right, and it's something that you just always need to be aware of as you're planning a technology business in particular, or a technology approach within your company. It's something as a lesson for me that it's never lost on me anymore. It's crucial to the success of technology initiatives. So what could we have done differently? And this is not just about the last company, Katerra. It's about all the companies. But I'd start, I guess, with a quote from one of my good friends there. And everyone, there was a lot of commentary about maybe Katerra did too much. I think a lot of us and a lot of the executives felt that when we sit down and look at what was successful and not successful, there was probably a lot of times where we didn't go far enough, and certainly maybe we didn't do it quickly enough. The only thing you really have control on after budget is time. It's whether it doesn't matter whether you're selling, it doesn't matter whether you're buying, and it doesn't matter whether you're executing. In your day-to-day work, almost the only thing you really have a lot of control over is time. And if you know that and you think about that, your ability to make decisions effectively and from the best possible information, understanding as much close as possible what the best possible outcomes can be, is crucial to success. And that thematically, decisions is something now that's really, really become important to me. These other two things were things, it's fairly obvious when we were consolidating and consuming companies at a higher rate in Katerra. It was the same when I was at Autodesk. It's really hard to rip and replace the way systems and solutions that people are currently using with new innovative solutions. It's really hard. And I think transformation within a business is probably still the greatest challenge that most of us are trying to deal with. There's many ways of looking at transformation. I think that change management, if you like, or understanding the value of change is extremely important in being able to accelerate through that. And I think that underlines the last point, which is really understanding why you're moving to a new solution and what it's going to do to accelerate your ability to be agile with change became a big learning for us. Other things that are kind of permeating everything I'm thinking about now is this moving towards a design for constructability mindset. Design for constructability is not the same as design for manufacturing. Design for manufacturing is an incredibly interesting and vibrant area of technology and construction right now. But design for constructability really talks more about looking at the whole, as I said previously, looking at the whole of the building production process as almost like a factory floor. Good friend of mine, Martin Fisher at CIDCI, his team did a fascinating study where they put movement detection cameras on bays of a building, a faculty building that they were constructing over 18 months. So every time a bay was completed, which is obviously 4 columns, floor and ceiling, they would put a camera in there and track how much movement there was within those bays for the duration of the project. And that didn't mean work was being carried out in the bay, just whether even somebody walked through it. And at the end of the 18 months, they crunched all the numbers and they tested it on other projects as well. And they found it somewhere plus or minus 3% activity per bay for the duration of the project. And I always like to think that that's a good way of really sort of rethinking how you think about a building as a factory floor. Is if I'm only getting a 3% return per square foot of activity over the duration of a project, if I compared that with factory, imagine how Elon Musk would feel if his factory manager said, yeah, you only get 3% utilization of every square foot of our factories. Rethinking the problem and then coming up with solutions as to how you could address that is to me really helps you understand what to measure and how to rank the things that you're trying to change. And I guess that machines are very good at doing this. And then people are wondering, they are wondering how machines are going to help them. And when by machines, I'm obviously talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning computers. The new machine solutions that I think we're going to start to see, and we're just barely climbing out of the mud right now with how we're implementing database solutions that can really help us with that intelligence. I think we're just going to start to see a whole new generation of very interesting kind of opportunities open up as we really start to dig into the digital data that we have available to us. And one of the ways of doing that is going to be, I like to think of it looking over the wall. As we look over the wall to other industries and try and figure out exactly how other industries are being successful and why they're being successful, I think there's a lot we can learn. I've become very fascinated with decisions and how people look at opportunities for change. That's one of my favorite sayings, is that people trust their memories way more than facts. And we see that in the construction industry as much, if not more, than anywhere else. There is this decision bias also is affected by other factors. Christopher Shabry and Daniel Simmons, who I've got to know reasonably well, wrote this book called The Invisible Gorilla. I would urge you to go onto YouTube and take the test. So if you run the YouTube video, do exactly what it tells you on the screen, and see if you're surprised by the result of taking that test. Inattentional blindness is this phrase that they invented basically for explaining how human beings don't see things that you'd expect them to see. Our brains are very good at filtering out things that aren't going to hurt us, kill us, chase us, because it all started when we were back in the forest and living in a cave. That if something wasn't moving quickly, if something didn't have teeth, then our brain would just blank it out, because you can only consume so many pixels of information into your brain at one time. Machines obviously don't have that problem. And so one of the reasons it's so fascinating and interesting to see how certainly visual recognition and technologies, machine learning, which will lead to some narrow AI opportunities, are going to help us. We've seen this before. We've seen this happen in other industries. And we don't have a digital data shortage problem in building production. What we have is an ability to address that digital data problem. The same happened in marketing. I was working with a lot of marketing solutions 4 to 5 years ago. What we saw there was a dramatic growth in MarTech, marketing technology. We went from like 500 companies to well over 7,000 companies very, very quickly. And you, as a user of technology, if you like, in your business, suddenly find yourself overwhelmed by all this information that potentially could help you be better at understanding your business, but almost no ways of parsing it and understanding it. Scott Brinker termed this phrase hacking marketing, which really led to this idea that the digitally dynamic worker has to be a 10x worker, has to be someone who can be 10 times better at understanding, how this data could be effective and help them work within their business. The reason that you find yourself being so well targeted by ads in whether it be through Facebook or email or when you browse the web, is because there's a huge amount that's done in understanding behavior of users and buying behaviors, such that now you find yourself really only seeing the things that are mostly relevant to you. It's a little bit creepy, but the explanation is really is that there was a huge amount of work done to understand exactly how that data that was created by all these marketing materials and technologies could be used to better market to you. We have that opportunity in construction. I like to think it's a lot of that's going to happen around decision value and how people can find themselves given the right information context to make better decisions. And the decision's value must be measurable. Right now, we find nearly all our decision information, if you like, is in this bottom left-hand side or at the bottom. We might have a lot of data, but we really don't have a good way of analyzing it. And if it is analyzed, it's normally a very manual process. And quite often we just find ourselves using experience or instinct and emotion to make decisions. The way that the next generation machines and the way that we'll be able to use information within construction is going to be very much more pointing towards the right-hand side, and having the machines help us, and by having machines work with teams to get us better information, better context to make better decisions. And that's kind of, as I come to the end of the presentation, it pivots me to talk about what's next for me and what I'm doing. I'm very, very happy that I can share a little bit about what I'm doing, and certainly this isn't a sales pitch. What my assertion is, and our assertion is in this company I'm working at now called Slate, is that what we need to do is create situational context for better decisions at any time for all people working across building production. It's a little bit like the way you use a GPS system like Waze. You know, right now with the way you manage information in construction is a little bit like driving in the 1970s. You got a paper map, like a paper drawing, and you hope it's up to date. And you probably got the radio on when you're listening to the disc jockey, listening to the radio, hoping you're told about weather or traffic. But generally speaking, you kind of drive into the traffic jam, and you have to deal with the issue as it presents itself physically in front of you. My assertion is that it should be much more like using a modern GPS, that you're actually told the route, and then the system is giving you context to make decisions to avoid traffic jams, to avoid issues ahead of time. It's going to show you a little bit what that looks like. Maybe share this video.
Would you like some suggestions for advancing the schedule today?
Okay, thanks for watching that. So we're putting together what's basically like a digital assistant for building production, which allows you to kind of understand every task and action and get information before, during, and after to make sure that you can get the best possible result. I realize I will need to move now to the end and go to questions. I can see there's a few coming out of the chat.
Okay,
there we go.
that's great. I think there's a lot of questions. I think you have a lot of your friends and colleagues from Katerra wondering about different aspects of that story. I guess what I would ask you is, based on that experience, what do you think the lessons learned were for the entire industry of both the successes and the ambitions, as well as its ultimate end?
In respect to Katerra.
Yes.
That's a very big and broad question. I don't think that's the last time we're going to see a Katerra. Let's put it that way. I think I actually know of maybe 5 or 6 initiatives that are happening around the world. I mean, obviously, because I work there, I quite often get asked to comment. And even though I was not working on the construction production side, if you like, I got to touch a lot of parts of the company and see what was working, what was not working. I would say that what's the biggest learning? I mean, I don't think there was as much went badly as you might think. Having worked in different corporations that went through a lot of, if you like, expansion, retraction, redundancies, growth. I don't think there's anything you could point at that would necessarily say that it's not going to be experienced in the same way again in the next Katerra that gets created. When it comes to the use of cash, the use of resources, the way that people manage teams, there were definitely lessons learned in, really when you're trying to start your business, when you're saying it's like, we're going to try and do everything so it'll be cheaper and more and delivered more quickly, it leads you down a certain pathway. And I think one of the things that was learned very quickly in Katerra was that, cheaper is not actually the goal. It's like actually quality became much more important. And so ultimately understanding your client and what you're trying to deliver became extremely important. So if you want a job because the expectation was you were going to deliver it for less money, that immediately put a set of constraints around you, which is very different from saying, actually, no, I'm going to deliver a project that's the highest quality. The K90 project I mentioned to you, which was delivered in 86 days, actually, when we ran lasers around that project to sort of look at the quality of the construction and the walls, it was dramatically better than anything else we'd done in the previous years. Were some of the projects in the previous years, if you like, oversold in terms of what we could achieve in terms of costs? Yeah, there were probably things that we were learning as you start to move from more traditional methods to offsite construction methods. But I think you have to go through those. You have to go through those challenges. You have to go through that. Because of our status and our ambition, we had companies visiting us. It was almost every week we would have a construction company come and visit us. From some of the largest companies in the world. I got to work with a lot of them on the technology side because they wanted to come and learn from us what we were doing. And I think we were always open about the things that were challenges. I know individuals may have look at even from either a personal level or a professional level, or that the things that may have affected them well or it may have affected them badly. But I think overall, I've been very gratified by how much goodwill there has been towards what Katerra was trying to achieve.
Right. There's another question here from Steve Burrows, who I think worked at Katerra as well.
Yeah, hi, Steve.
So Steve asks, where did Katerra get along the Dunning-Kruger continuum?
Okay. I think we were probably stuck. My personal perception was, and I was very lucky to get to know the founders very well. I think at the beginning of 2020, we'd gone through the hard lessons, and the things that were really challenging had happened. I think it was unfortunate that the impact that COVID had is like, a very large company based in France telling me about how much money they were losing every month, based on sites being shut down. I don't think we were affected as badly as some, because at least we could keep factories running. And, so we had some advantages over traditional construction, but it was still it was a tough environment. I think we'd rode down, if you like, the slope from the initial kind of peak kind of expectations and overconfidence. But the new confidence were happening. There was a lot of alignment in how we were going to get over the challenges and move the business forward.
We have a couple of questions about Slate. Is there a beta version available?
There certainly is. We just, if you like, opened ourselves up to the world. We're stealthy rather than stealth. We're not looking to broadly sell the product right now. We had a prototype release at the end of last year. We just did a release one, if you like, which now people can start to work with. And we're looking for companies that have got the right attitude, or around adoption. You saw that chasm diagram is like, yeah, we're looking for people who are in the innovator kind of mode, that really want to kind of stretch the way they're working. And just email me. I'm very happy to talk to you about it and show you what we've got.
And is Slate also creating an offsite residential model?
No.
Okay.
No, we're a software company.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. We have a question about capital and funding, and just wondering whether there are some people who thought that Katerra received too much money too quickly. I just wonder if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, this goes back to again, it's like when you're sitting around a fire pit, which just doesn't, looking back, trying to think what worked and didn't work. When you look at funding, is like, something. What we were trying to do was so incredibly capital intensive that as long as you could feed, if you like, your ambition to achieve your goals, then you were able to, grow the company and put the resources in place. Is that too much money? It goes back to that phrase that maybe we should have been doing more. We consumed like 18 companies in 3 years. Went from 50 people up to over 8,000 people. Very, very quickly in 5 years. Too fast, maybe. I think if you talk to anyone who's in a position of responsibility in Katerra, I think maybe they would say that we should have probably done more than we did. We probably should have. I use the example of I think we probably used too much tradition in the way we were designing. I've had this assertion not just about Katerra, but about the industry in general, is that we don't train our architects to design for constructability, and so constructability or buildability, if you like, when you're in manufacturing. If you're designing a car, designers are trained about how machining and methodologies would work to enable them to build something. Whereas I think in architecture, you're dealing with very much more with design intent spaces. There's no physics in any of the design programs. So it's not like you're in a gaming environment where the physics of the world are real. It's just you're pretty much in free form, and I think that probably permeated some of the stuff we were doing. I think if I could have changed anything around our design, I would have said that we probably could have been more like product designers than we were. We would probably still be acting a lot like architects, even though we had some fantastic people really pushing the envelope. I think we could have done even more.
So interesting. We have a completely separate, completely different question here from Nitesh Nandaraja. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name, Nitesh. Apart from geolocated AR, is there a better way to use BIM so the not so BIM educated
Yeah. Interestingly enough, even though I was lucky to be so involved with it at the start, I do think we're overly focused on BIM as being at the center of the way that we're working, and there's a few assertions to why that's the case. One of them is definitely that the people dominating the software supply side, at the center of their world is a BIM authoring tool. So you almost have the onion effect that everything surrounds it. Whereas I actually think, a building information model is just one piece of context, for you to be able to do better constructability. In some ways, it's just a signpost, if you like, for where information lives. And I think probably we think of it too much as being an artifact that has to be at the center, and it's caused us to kind of even look at the digital twin and the digital prototype as needing to be there for us to be effective. I like to think, as I could probably describe, if I asked you as a designer to design me a garage for my car, I could probably explain it to you over the phone, and you'd probably be able to draw it exactly as I explained it, without the need for us to pass a BIM model to each other. And I think that points to the fact that we need to be much better understanding all the contextual information, not just the graphical information, and then think of that as being a way of solving the problem that we have in construction. I'm not sure I can completely answer the question, but got me a little bit on my soapbox of like trying to make sure we don't think of BIM as the center of the world.
I think there's many people out there wishing the same thing. I realize these questions are coming at you somewhat pell-mell, but I'm trying to moderate and pull things out of the chat box. So we're kind of all over the map here. We have a question here from Subendu Datta. How would Slate get context on construction data, especially with each construction project being so unique?
Yeah, we've got to work with some extremely forward-thinking and large construction firms. I mean, one of them we talked about openly, which is Skanska. And it's the good thing about maybe being infamous for where I've worked is that I get a lot of opportunity to talk to a lot of people in some of the most forward-thinking firms. I think that we generally tell ourselves that in construction, every project is unique. Everything's a prototype. It's too difficult to get information. And I found when I've looked at other industries, and I worked a lot in, I was CEO of a company that was doing translation management solutions, where you were integrating multiple systems, marketing solutions, marketing technologies, to be able to better manage the process of translation. And sometimes they were called pairs. You're trying to use sometimes AI automated translation, sometimes human in the loop translation over 27, 28 language pairs, and trying to make that happen in like 2 or 3 days instead of 6 months, which you could take for some projects. There are just as complex and difficult data kind of integration connection problems in other industries as there are in construction. We probably just haven't been able to join the dots and connect this disparate data as much as other industries have. Where if you're working in medical diagnosis or finance, the types of learnings you can get from digital information now are incredible. It's just unbelievable what they're able to achieve. And they have probably more different technologies and solutions and platforms than we have in construction. So I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's the right question. But I don't think we have a digital data problem. What we have is a connectivity problem. And notice I didn't use the word integration because I think it's well overused.
Richard, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time together, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and your honesty and insights with all of us. It's been really a thought-provoking morning for all of us here on the West Coast, and for those of you who join us from around the world. So thank you so much. For those of you who might have joined the call late, we'll be recording this session, and it will be on the CIDCI website, so you'll be able to see that there. We encourage you to sign up for future CIDCI webinars. We talk about many different things, a lot of different innovation ideas, and we'd love to have you join us. Next week, we'll be having an entirely different conversation with Kareem Tahawi and Kobe Eshun entitled Creating Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion by Making Money Flow. Access to working capital is a significant hurdle for small building contractors and trade contractors, and it's an acute problem for those classified as disadvantaged business enterprises. The Chippy Works inventors have created a solution, and we'd like to hear from them about what their solution will be. So you can join us at 8 a.m. next Friday morning to hear their story. Be sure to check the CIDCI website for recording of this session in the next couple weeks. And Richard, our deepest thanks. We can't wait to have you back again to hear about Slate and your progress there.
No.
Thank you again.
Thanks so much. And thanks for your patience, everyone, with me this morning. I really appreciate the time you've given me. And please don't hesitate to reach out. It's richard.harpham@slate.ai, and I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to have a chat.
Thanks again, Richard.
All right. Bye.